I was reading through some forums a few days ago, and one of the topics came up of Atlantis. All right, now the topic of Atlantis is extremely interesting. Had you asked me if I thought Atlantis could be real like 5-6 years ago, I would have said no, not really. I would have been open to the idea, but at that point in time, I had certainly not seen any real evidence in my studies that showed any true potential for a continent in the Atlantic Ocean to have disappeared. That's one hell of a claim, right? It's one hell of a claim. What started to change me, where I started to come around to take the concept a little more serious, was when I started learning about the electric universe and Velikovsky, etc. Once you start getting into that realm of science and history, suddenly the Atlantean story starts to become more possible. And so now at my point in my historical studies, I'm way more open to the idea that Atlantis could exist, all right? But as I start trying to learn new things about this and start trying to find real research with respect to Atlantis, what I'm finding is that I'm running into all kinds of garbage research out there that is absolutely pissing me off. Right, I need you guys out there who are studying Atlantis to stop buying into the pseudo garbage that is spewed from the internet and instantly saying, "Oh, hey, we found Atlantis." Stop it. Like, there's the dumbest stuff out there that people claim that is Atlantis, and it doesn't match anything we could ever imagine as being a sunken continent. So what I want to do is I want to talk to everybody really quick and to tell you guys to stop pissing me off with your ridiculous claims based off of garbage that you hear on the internet because you think something looks like something that you vaguely heard about, etc., etc. Stop buying into the garbage that are just... All right, what am I talking about? What the hell is going on here? Why am I pissed? All right, so every time nowadays when I go to start looking into some sort of Atlantean research, or if I run into it, I more often than not run into the dumbest crap. I want to cover some of the dumbest crap that I run into. I want to show you to stop doing this because there's no reason to go down these routes. It is a waste of your time and it's a waste of my time. And I'm tired of wasting my time reading like half of a paper and then they come around to something stupid like, "Oh, Atlantis is Antarctica." No. All right, let's cover the basic points of what Atlantis is not. Because I swear to God, if I have to read or see one more person say that something stupid is Atlantis, I'm gonna start slapping people. That's it. Let's go over point by point what I want to see stop from the Atlantean research community. Or any of you people who don't even care about Atlantis, but you just kind of hear something on the side and then you parrot it and then, oh God, that pisses me off too. All right, let's cover some of the basics. All right, I want to start with let's start with some of the reasons why we think Atlantis exists. That thing begins, I suppose, it's funny. I'm going to start with Plato because that's where pretty much everybody kind of starts with, simply because it's been memorialized, basically. It's been lionized in Western research, but there's a lot of cultures that say something about a sunken continent that involves some sort of a similar name. Aztlan, Atl, Atlantis, etc. There is definitely a root to the word that is interesting. So we find a lot of cultures around the general area of the Atlantic Ocean that seem to have stories about some sort of a sunken continent. That's thing one that's interesting. Before we even start talking about names, there's cultures in South America. The American Indians up here had stories about it. We had tribes over here that had stories about it. And of course, tons of people up here in the European, Mediterranean, Middle Eastern places, they had stories about a sunken continent as well. All right, this is fact. There's nothing to argue about. I am not going to go get all the little details because there are many other videos out there that people have made that will absolutely fill you in more on that crap. Just go search for it because there are much better people than me out there that have some amazing work on this stuff, books as well. And I know you're probably saying, well, where are they? What are they, etc. Fine. Okay, here, let's cover a few. Let me see if I can get some of the basics here. Let's go over it. Okay, so we've already established that there are cultures in or surrounding the Atlantic Ocean that do indeed have the sunken continent concept within their mythos. I hate to say mythos, no, I'm going to say their histories. All right, so one of the reasons why a lot of their histories are ignored is because a lot of the cultures that I'm talking about, their stories aren't coming in any form of writing. They're coming in the form of oral tradition, right? And in mainstream research today, both in the alt academic side and the academic side, probably a little less in the academic side, a lot of people still push aside oral traditions and oral histories as unreliable at best. And then, of course, at worst, oral traditions can be labeled as just absolute fictional garbage. That is an unfortunate situation that we run into when we begin studying, well, I mean, let's be honest, when we begin studying any ancient culture, we run into this issue that oral tradition is more often than not included in any way, shape, or form in the actual studies. They have no problem including it in their, like, you know, the mythology. You know, they say, it's a myth. It's just a legend. These people were cavemen, whatever, man. They were cave people. You know, come on. You know, if you're a human, you have a certain level of capability within you. And to think that all of these ancient cultures were just walking around, bumping into each other, going ooga booga, and making zero effort to progress until recently. Right? That is an insult to, like, all of our ancestors. 100% an insult. So whenever I hear academics push aside oral tradition, it's pathetic. I mean, it's dumb. If you're a mainstream researcher on either side and you're not paying attention to oral tradition, you're already behind the truth. You're never going to get there. So it's important for us to listen to oral traditions. Now, oral traditions of a sunken continent are all over the world. I mean, they're everywhere you look. Actually, if you really get down to it, the further back in time we go and we start paying attention to what we have about ancient histories, and admittedly it gets tough, right? We don't have books from 2,000 years ago. That might come as a surprise to some of you, but we do not have any printed material from 2,000 years ago. There's no ancient, tome that we have that exists that would have any of this documented from that time period, right? Anything we have written-wise is either what we found on, like, clay tablets. See, I'm so pissed right now. I'm trying to stay calm, but holy crap did this stuff make me mad when I read. Okay. We have things like clay tablets from the Sumerian time, like the Library of Nineveh, etc. We have stuff in clay and stone that exists for writing, but we do not have any ancient tomes. Please remember that. And I think I've kind of covered some of this, and I'll do more later about it. But we don't have, like, fantastic writing from ancient history. It doesn't exist. So if we end up discarding all oral tradition, we are at a loss. Like, we're already at a disadvantage. So we won't do that. All right, I've talked enough about that crap. Let's move on. What are some other cultures that talk about the possibility of Atlantis? Let me throw that out there really fast. And of course, I'm getting ahead of myself. Why am I even saying other cultures before we begin with what's most well known? All right, because I kind of already assumed that if you've listened this far, you're already well aware of where the Western people generally get the idea of Atlantis. All right, fine. Let's cover that first. Let's go through the Plato. So Plato provides us what is essentially a detailed description of Atlantis. And these come through two of his works. And that would be, they're dialogues of Timaeus and Critias. Now, according to Plato's account, Atlantis was a powerful and advanced civilization that existed around 9,000 years ago before his time. It's important to remember he's talking about his time when he's talking about present time. All right, so take that into account. Of course, and then there's other problems with time when we get into chronology, but we'll deal with that a little later. Yeah, we'll deal with that later. Fine, we'll talk about that in this show too. Maybe. I don't know. See, and this is what highlights Atlantis, is there is so much crap that we technically should talk about to really clarify why I'm generally pissed off right now. See, I'm breathing, I'm calm, everything is fine. I'm not slapping anybody, I'm chill. But it's important, it's important to realize that whatever I cover here is like nothing. Like I said, go look at other researchers' works as well, using critical thinking skills. And remember, utilize critical thinking skills as you listen to whatever crap I tell you here. Whatever information I give you here, make sure you're applying your critical thinking skills. Ask the good questions. Stay objective. Stay humble, etc., etc. Don't forget to practice your skills. All right, back to Plato. Let's cover this. So I guess I should have said this earlier, but what I will describe with respect to whatever Plato says about Atlantis, this is very much going to be from a standard mainstream perspective. I'm not going to inject anything yet about any kind of evidence. Everything I say here is just to give you an idea of what your average westernized person would generally know about Atlantis, if they know anything at all about Atlantis. Oh, and here's another sidetrack. I'm not talking crap against anybody who has never taken Atlantis seriously. I sure as hell never took Atlantis seriously up until about 6 or 7 years ago. So I do not fault you even if you're deep into the alt academic side of things and you are, questioning things correctly, you are using critical thinking skills, but, the sinking of a continent is a little too much for you. I 100% understand, as I was in your boat, like I said, 6 or 7 years ago. And to one degree or another, I'm still in the boat a little bit because I have not personally seen the true evidence that 100% proves that the sunken continent exists. So don't forget that. I'm not here to promote Atlantis as being 100% fact while talking down to the people who keep pissing me off about saying why other things in the world are Atlantis are not true. Okay. All right. Moving on. Let's talk. What is Atlantis? We talked about 9,000 years ago. All right, let's keep going. So if we use mainstream chronology, Plato's description puts Atlantis around 11,000 years from our current time. Fine, whatever. Okay. All right, so what does Plato even say about this? So Plato describes Atlantis as an island continent situated beyond the pillars of Hercules or Heracles. Yeah, that's always a weird one. Heracles and Hercules. I hear it pronounced both ways. I don't know. One of you nerds out there can correct me. That's fine. I don't care. All right. I mean, I know it's probably important to get that right, and I agree, but I have no idea. I hear people say it both ways. All right. So the fact that it's beyond the pillars of Hercules, it suggests that Atlantis was located somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, possibly in the vicinity of the present-day Azores. The Azores being the number one candidate right now of the general area of where Atlantis may have been at one point in time. The Canary Islands are also kind of in there as well, or further west than all of that. The interesting thing is that the Azores actually have quite a bit of possible legitimacy behind them. The more you kind of study some of the deeper research about Atlantis, the Azores actually start to become a very good candidate of what may have been left over of the event that took Atlantis down. It's an interesting possibility. The geography in the area is obviously amazing, right? With the Mid-Atlantic Rift, you have those little dotted islands out there in the middle of nowhere for some weird reason. Very interesting situation there. All right, let's go on. Now, Plato describes Atlantis as being a vast land with a combination of mountains, plains, and water channels. It had a central hill surrounded by concentric rings of water and land, and those concentric rings are one of the mentions that have caused other researchers, I'll put those in quotes. God, this just angers me. All right, keep going. All right, so these concentric rings, they alternated between land and sea. So you had a ring of land, a ring of sea, water, land until the center, where the central island housed a magnificent capital known as the City of Atlantis. Now, one of the things that's important here is that if Atlantis is described as the size of a continent, I don't know how big it was, but obviously it was a large landmass. One of the first things that's important to realize here is that when anybody back then, I guess, when they would have talked about Atlantis, they would have been talking about just the city. Now, the continent would have had all kinds of other, I would imagine, cities and villages probably, and other provinces out there with other names. Atlantis is apparently really only describing the glorious capital city area. It's important to make that distinction, all right? So keep that in mind. All right, now the capital city of Atlantis is said to be an architectural insanity. There's all kinds of crazy stuff here, which might still be at the bottom of the ocean if this is true. And if any of this is true, if any of the architectural marvels that Atlantis may have had are real, it's highly possible that they're still down there in some form or another, buried under God knows how much sediment. But the reality is there might be legitimate archaeological finds to discover down there around the Azores or just in the mid-Atlantic ridge in general. And it's almost impossible nowadays to go do underwater and archaeological work there. There's all kinds of sort of weird claims now to there's all this garbage politics now down there, which makes things, well, it's the same story all over the planet for anybody who wants to do archaeological work nowadays, right? Governments are always in the way. It's the same problem down there in the Azores Atlantic Ridge area. Not the whole Atlantic Ridge. I'm not saying it's everywhere. But hey, you know what? If you're going to go do archaeological work in the mid-Atlantic Ridge, you have to have some good equipment, right? That's not shallow water. You're going down there for a bit. So basically, there was one hell of a city in the center of the continent. Apparently the center. I don't know if it was the center of the continent necessarily geographically, or if it's just considered the center of the center of the state or country or whatever the hell it was. All right, but it had all kinds of palaces, temples, and canals. So, and these works were amazing works apparently. You know, these are high level technological, not like computer stuff. I just mean they're really skilled, high level masonry, stuff like that. These people knew what they were doing. I don't know how they did it. I'm not claiming to know any of that, but it's supposed to be pretty insane. All right, now at the center of all of this was the Grand Palace complex. All right, and this is where the king, and I believe he had sons or something like that ruling. All right, so Atlantis is basically described as a highly developed and prosperous civilization. That's the general gist. All right. And this is, of course, where researchers let their imaginations go wild with zero evidence to prove any claims that they start to make. Okay. All right. So, apparently, the Atlanteans possessed advanced technologies, had sophisticated culture and infrastructure, and their economy was apparently pretty amazing. Now, this apparently you like how I said apparently 10,000 times? Back then, so the economy was apparently big. I said apparently again. I'm going to keep this in here. I don't care. The trade routes back then, before whatever happened that took Atlantis down, we have evidence that it seems like people were doing a lot of back and forth pre-Atlantean period. And we'll go into a little bit more maybe at the end of this about how Atlantis may have sunk, what maybe stopped all of this. But we do have a lot of evidence that there was trade going on between a lot of the cultures around that area. And it's important to realize that if Atlantis existed, that means it really wasn't that long of a distance to trade between Africa or Europe. I mean, it would have been, relatively speaking from now, a hop, skip, and a jump. It wouldn't have been all that big of a deal. And the waters may have been even more calm back then due to the geographical situation that presented itself to the traders. So it makes trading even more easier if you're just traveling you're only going 100 miles as opposed to 1,000. So that would have been the reality of their situation back there. So there's no reason to believe that trade wasn't going on if Atlantis existed, which also fills the gap in a lot with a lot of the people who kind of go for the world being a global type of world back in the day. If the Earth's geography was different back then. You know, if you had land masses where we no longer have land masses, sailing wouldn't have been a problem. And it's interesting that a lot of those guys don't look at something like Atlantis and take it seriously, because that could really help their theory of a old school global civilization doing trading. If you don't have a giant ass Atlantic Ocean or a Pacific Ocean in your way, if you have more large continents hanging out in between, how much easier is it to trade, right? Just a thought. I'm not saying that that's what happened, although I'm leaning towards that direction, but there's more to it, right? Well, maybe I'll cover some of that at the end. Basically, Plato describes Atlantis as a very highly developed and prosperous civilization. Now, he also goes on to say that they possessed all kinds of advanced technologies. I don't know what those were, so I'm not jumping into any boat that says, oh yeah, hey, they had flying machines and computers, or the teleportation, or whatever. I don't think that's what he meant. That's not certainly what I'm on board with. I have no reason currently to believe that. When we say advanced technologies, people can be advanced without computers, right? You can do pretty advanced stuff or accomplish pretty advanced tasks with just advanced skills, right? Well, I will get into that kind of stuff in a different talk, right? But they had that. These people were not chumps. They knew what they were doing. You know, they were operating at a high level. All right. Now, these technologies would have led to all kinds of sophisticated infrastructure. And as we talked about, this would have helped their economy. I don't know what their economy was. Now, they were also known for their navigational skills. So this kind of leads into the trading thing and the exploration thing, which there's other evidence that connects stuff like this to Atlantis. The other aspect that Atlantis is known for, or the Atlanteans are known for, is their military capability. Now, the military side of the story of Atlantis is extremely interesting, because the way Plato says it is that when Atlantis goes down, when the event happens that takes the continent out, there had already been a war going on between the ancient Hellenes and the Atlanteans. Like, these people are sitting there having all-out war within the Mediterranean and the surrounding area, maybe up in Europe, God knows how much in North Africa. But basically, Plato says that this war that the Atlanteans had started was coming to an end. But basically, there had been an all-out war in the area, and it has come to an end. And the Atlanteans had lost. Like, they had been pushed back. So what we find in this part of the story is that you have various detachments of Atlantean soldiers kind of scattered around the Mediterranean and European area. And then all of a sudden, an outside event, not related to the war or anything, an outside event happens, and it takes everybody out. It takes out the ancient Hellenes along with the Atlanteans. And then we find ourselves with all kinds of stranded soldiers after this grand event, to where everything has to change, because the Atlanteans, whoever survives, no longer has a homeland to go to. You know, and same with basically, well, I guess pretty much everybody on the planet at that point in time, because this would have been a planetary event. We'll cover that in a sec. But I find this aspect of the story fascinating, because the story isn't told in a way that's like, it's not told in some sort of a fantastical way to where it's like a movie. It's told in a more realistic way. You know, it talks about, yeah, the Atlanteans had some technology and stuff, and they were a military power. All that's believable. Any culture could be like that. And then this culture fans out and goes and attacks. That's not interesting. There are warlike cultures all over the planet, all throughout time. These people, they go out and they try to take over. That's pretty standard. There's nothing crazy about that. The ancient Hellenes on the other side, they fight the Atlanteans. They get into a war, and while Plato doesn't go into the details of the war or anything, which is interesting because he just says there was a war. He could have played that up. He could have said all kinds of stuff that would have created a fantastical fictional story using a war with a cataclysmic ending of the sinking of Atlantis. None of that happens. So the Atlanteans fan out, they attack. I don't know how long the war lasts, but eventually they lose and they're getting pushed back. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, within a completely disconnected event, Earth gets slammed with a one hell of an event that takes down the continent. And that's where it ends for that. There's nothing fantastical about that in the sense of it's not like a story that you would tell your bedtime people to. Your bedtime people. It's not a bedtime story, right? It's not like a movie. It's just kind of a sequence of events, a very basic sequence of events. I don't think people look at Plato's events like that in that light, because it's not a movie. And even more interesting, it's not just Atlantis that gets messed up. You know, they talk about the Mediterranean area, but the Mediterranean area gets messed up too. The ancient Hellenes, they also lose basically their entire culture as well. He talks about how, you know, in the Mediterranean area, there's entire cities, chunks of landmass in that area that literally just get swallowed up by the earth. So it's very much a realistic story if you think about it objectively. If there was going to be a grand event that took down a continent, it would have to affect the world, and it does in the story, at least within the area that they're able to talk about, right? They're not talking about what goes on in the South Pole because they're not there. They're not recording that. They're recording the general area of what happened. So that's very important to remember whenever you start learning and reading Plato's accounts of Atlantis. It is very much just a point-by-point, at the end of the day, a point-by-point description of the events that happened in the past. Now, why did they end up fanning out and attacking everybody? What's going on there? Well, according to Plato's account, the Atlanteans become corrupt because their society gradually deviated from its virtuous and idealistic origins. Now, he attributes this corruption to a combination of factors. These factors would be, let's name them, I guess. Decline in moral virtue. So Plato describes how over time the Atlanteans began to lose their moral virtue and they abandoned the ideals that had initially characterized their civilization. The pursuit of material wealth and power began to take precedence over wisdom, justice, and righteousness. Does that sound like something that's going on right now? Gee, is it good? All right, we're not going to talk about that. This, of course, leads to hubris and greed. Now, the rulers of Atlantis, who were initially wise and good people, they became corrupt by the desire for more power and more wealth. Standard story. And it never ends well, does it? That story never ends well. And here we are doing it again. So they become consumed by their greed, which led to a distortion of all their valuables and principles. Now, their ambition and arrogance, or hubris, drove them to seek dominions over other nations. So they started looking across whatever sea existed at that time between them and the North African, European, Mediterranean area. This, of course, then led to their expansionist ambitions. Now, the Atlanteans sought to expand their empire and conquer other lands because they really wanted to have everything, right? That corruption was complete now. Makes you wonder, what the hell? I wonder why. You know, I wonder what triggered it. That's a good question. What changed? Was it just a simple snowballing of, you know, they got powerful, they were getting better, and then greed sort of crept in, they wanted more? Maybe. That's a very simple, you know, that's very possible, and probably what happened. But I also wonder if there was anything else that could have triggered that direction in their society. Was there something else that happened? Something to think about. So what they did is they wanted to subjugate all the neighboring regions, including, like I said, parts of Europe, Mediterranean, including the ancient Athens. All right, so their aggressive imperialistic tendencies further contributed to their corruption. Plato then goes on to describe the war that happened between the Atlanteans and the ancient Athenian civilization. I wonder what that was. I'm curious what the ancient Athenian civilization covered. That would be interesting to know as well. We'll dive into that later. I think we might have some good leads on that, actually. Anyway, so the Atlanteans launch a military campaign against Athens and all the other Mediterranean powers. At the end of the day, though, Athens apparently successfully resisted the Atlantean invasion. So the Athens wins. Now, Plato says that there's divine punishment. That essentially, once the Athenians destroy or beat the crap out of the Atlanteans. Beat the crap may not be right. It was a legit struggle. Like, it was a legit war, it sounds like. Very good back and forth. But the Athenians were no joke. These guys were some serious warriors, apparently. So, Plato narrates that the gods punished the Atlanteans for their hubris and corruption by the catastrophic event that, it's an earthquake that sinks Atlantis and beneath the ocean. Goes bye-bye. But, as I was saying earlier, so what I just said makes it sound like, oh yeah, it is kind of like a movie. The bad guys are the Atlanteans and the Athenians win. And then the gods punish the Atlanteans. Okay, but hold on. So what happens to the Athenians? Right? The Athenians get destroyed too. This is an all-encompassing event that happens. It's not just Atlanteans that go down. Everybody goes down to some degree or another, right? It's the ancient Athenians lose cities as well. They lose tons of their men. Their entire army almost gets wiped out by this as well. So it's hard to say, yes, there's a god sitting up there just, doling out justice to the Atlanteans. No, everybody gets screwed, which would make sense if it was a natural disaster. So it's things like this that lead me to believe that something like the Atlantis story could have some truth behind it. Because if you read between the lines and you push off the fantastical, if you don't look at it as a fiction and you inject a real life cataclysm that would have taken down a continent, everything around would have been affected. And everybody is affected. And I have completely lost track of what I was supposed to be talking about. Alright, so now that I've gone over what Atlantis is, and if you're an Atlantean researcher, you already knew everything I just said, so that was a big waste of time. Kind of like when Atlantean researchers waste my time when they tell me that certain things are Atlantis when they couldn't possibly be Atlantis. These are the things that I want you as Atlantean researchers to stop doing. Just stop it. See, I'm calming down. I'm breathing, it's fine, but you need to stop doing these things. The first thing that pisses me off about Atlantean researchers is when they try to claim that Antarctica is Atlantis. This is not Atlantis. Stop saying that Antarctica is Atlantis. You see this? Look up here. You go up north, here is the Pillars of Heracles. Way down south, this is not Atlantis. This is Antarctica. It could have been something else too. I don't know. But it is not Atlantis. And don't you dare try to tell me, oh yeah, well, it's like Atlantis but it could be, it's west of the Pillars of Heracles on the longitude. No, shut up. This is not Atlantis. You see this? This is way down here. If you're going to say that Antarctica is Atlantis, why not just pick any other continent on here, all right? You can just stop it. This is not Atlantis. You see this up here? The Atlantic Ocean. Down here, not the Atlantic Ocean. Stop saying that Atlantis is Antarctica. It's pissing me off. I know that Antarctica seems mysterious to you, and it is. I don't disagree. But you saying that Atlantis is Antarctica does not make you a deep person. All right, you're not impressing anybody because there's no reason to believe that Atlantis is in Antarctica. We'll deal with Atlantis later. You know what? I'm going to deal with, or not Atlantis. We will deal with Atlantis later, but we'll deal with Antarctica later as well. Of course there's something up with Antarctica, but just because a place we don't know a whole lot about, at least the public anyway, just because we don't know a lot about this thing doesn't mean that it's the hidden city of Atlantis. Okay, and you know what? Here, here's number 2. Let's go. Ding. Number 2. The second thing that irritates the crap out of me when it comes to Atlantean researchers. Atlantean researchers have a terrible habit of lumping all ancient cultures, all ancient lost cultures, all into just Atlantis. That's it. Everybody throws all of them right in there. Why? Why? Because anybody who does this is generally Western trained. So what that means is that your grand knowledge comes from Western influences. Plato, or whatever the hell we've kind of gathered, and everything points to Atlantis. Atlantis is something in our culture, right? It's been hyped up. There's movies, shows, etc., books. You know, Atlantis is very much within our culture. Continents like Mu, Hyperborea, Lemuria, etc. are not, at least to some degree or another. So why does everybody ignore the other continents that also were lost and want to shove everything into Antarctica? There's no reason to do that. There is no reason to do that. You don't have to take all of the ancient cultures that may have existed and throw it into Atlantis. And then you throw it into Antarctica. You know, all right. That thing too, you get that? So don't do that anyway. Don't forget. All right, let's go on. No, here. Even more to the point. If Atlantis went down, that is a global catastrophe that would have done that, right? Even in just the basic story of Plato, right? It's not just Atlantis goes down and nobody else is affected. Everywhere is affected. Everybody gets hit hard. If a continent went down, in the real world, if a continent sank, you better believe that the entire planet is going through something. So it's also possible that other continents sank as well, and other cultures actually say this. They do talk about Mu. They do talk about Hyperborea. They talk about these other continents that were lost. We focus on Atlantis because Atlantis is very much a Western phenomenon. That is not the only continent that went down during this time period. It's very important to understand that. I'm calming down. All right. But remember that when you're doing your studies, when you're doing your research, if a continent goes down, the rest of the world is screwed, I promise. So don't forget that. All right, next thing. Oh, the next thing that pisses me off. This really angers me. So people lately, this is a newer situation. So now people are trying to claim that the Ricat structure, or however you pronounce it, I don't know. I'm just going to find it on my own. I'm not even going to search for it. This thing. Now people are starting to claim that this structure here, that this geological imprint, whatever, people want to start saying that this is Atlantis. This is not Atlantis. Does this look like Atlantis to you? Does this look like a sunken city to you? Seriously, look me in the eye. Tell me right now. Yes, that's underwater. Really. This is not Atlantis. All right, now, but this structure here is extremely important. It's actually probably important to the Atlantean story or one of the other cataclysms that hit Earth. Why? Because what this is, most likely, I'm not saying 100%, but it certainly seems like it if we look at scientific evidence and we incorporate the electric universe. This is a plasma strike location, right? This is literally just the bubbling up of a plasma strike hitting right here. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean I don't know what it would have affected here, but we do know that at some point in time, thunderbolts were traded between Earth and other cosmological bodies. So to make that claim, there better be some evidence. This is the kind of thing that is evidence for that possibility. Now, if you're wondering what I'm talking about, what do you mean this is a plasma strike? What are you talking about? So in the electric universe theory that basically gets rid of all current mainstream garbage cosmology, because we don't need it, what it says is that Earth was essentially pummeled. There's a lot of stuff it says, and I'll go into this later. But just to give you a little bit of a teaser, Earth traded thunderbolts with other cosmological bodies in the sky in our recent past. These are the kinds of things that all of our ancestors talk about in all the mythologies. I don't want to call them mythologies, in the histories, right? Everybody talks about, Zeus throwing thunderbolts. What is Zeus? What planet is Zeus? Zeus is Jupiter. Our ancestors literally say that Jupiter threw thunderbolts at Earth, us. Okay, it's right there. It's not even hidden. The fact, we'll deal with that in a different show. Point is, this is not Atlantis. It's not underwater. It's not. You're gonna say, well, it's kind of west of the Pillars of Hercules. No, no, no. We're not playing that crap. This is west of Hercules. Over here. This down here. No. You can say it is. No, this is like south. This is the same crap problem we run into with Antarctica. This is not Atlantis. Stop it. Now, the next thing that pisses me off about Atlantean researchers. What else pisses me off? Oh, okay, here. We'll do this one over here next. Let's go over. No, let's do. All right, here. This one doesn't piss me off, but it's got to end. Recently, I've been finding a group of studies that have been claiming that Atlantis is up in this area, the United Kingdom, you know, the island of Britannia, this kind of area. And there's some interesting scholarship that is twisted to make it sound like it was in this direction. Now, you can have some fun with this. I don't have time to go over what you can do with this evidence to kind of may throw it in this direction. But this is not Atlantis either. Like, the people who are doing this, the studies that are going over here, this is well meant, but the problem is the people who are doing these kinds of studies, they're holding on to mainstream knowledge of cosmology, of geology, etc. They're not branching out to the newer sciences like plasma physics, the electric universe, Velikovsky, etc. They're not reaching out far enough. Though the people who are claiming that this area here could have possibly been Atlantis, these people they're not making the next logical leap and jumping into the new sciences. They're still holding themselves back with the mainstream garbage. Don't do that. Always look for the new stuff. So this is not Atlantis either. I have not seen anything. Feel free to prove me wrong. I do not know where Atlantis is, by the way. As far as I'm concerned, if Atlantis is real, it's at the very least somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Seems credible to me. The Atlantic Ocean, that's where Atlantis is, and that's where all the cultures say they came from. The survivors of the cultures that may have come from Atlantis say they came from. But I don't see any reason to start throwing it up here. Throwing Atlantis up into this area, it's another one of those situations to where, I don't know, maybe it makes you think you're smart and you feel better about it because I've got some evidence that we're kind of twisting and throwing up in that direction. The problem is the science is not on your side. All right, now there's a whole other situation going on up here as well during these cataclysms. All of these areas, the entire planet is interesting in and of itself due to all the cataclysms that we went through, right? United Kingdom is no different. There's all kinds of crazy history that went up here. And a lot of the people's scholarship that is trying to, force Atlantis up here, there's good scholarship, but they're not reading their evidence correctly. They're trying to fit in, they're just trying to fit Atlantis in. That's the other problem with Atlantis. Here's another problem with Atlantis. Atlantis is like the perfect dumping ground for the outcome of your pet theory. Why? Because Atlantis is not known. I mean, the problem is there's no continent, right? So you can very easily claim, oh, UFOs flying around, or oh, all these cultures came from Atlantis, or oh, it's over here, or oh, I have this. And you can't actually substantiate any of it at the end of the day because it's not here. There's no continent. It's gone. And then if you start to try to claim, all right, well, here, let's backtrack. If you try to claim that something like this is Atlantis, right, the United Kingdom, if you try to put this as the lost, sunken continent of Atlantis, doesn't look very sunken to me, but they're trying to say it. If you're trying to make that claim, you're going to have some serious ruins, right? As I said earlier, as I went over, I shouldn't have gone over it, but as I went over all the details for Atlantis, it's one hell of a continent. It's pretty grand. There's a lot going on there. There would be ruins left. I mean, if they're building the kinds of structures that they were purported to be building, that's no joke, right? So you would find that stuff to some degree. And so if it was this area, we would have found something. We don't find anything like that here in the United Kingdom. You sure as hell don't find it down here. All of you guys that are, you know, riding this little pet theory here, there's nothing here. There is literally nothing here. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. By the way, look at this. Perfect plasma strike. You have the rings here, and then you have the little circle in the middle is what you see with electrical damage. I'm not going to claim that all these dendritic formations here are from electricity. It's probably from water, but very interesting in and of itself. I wouldn't be surprised if some of this is dendritic formations from being zapped with a thunderbolt. Anyway, I digress. All right. So we have to be careful when you guys have to be careful when you study Atlantis. You can't just throw whatever outcome you think you should have into Atlantis. Atlantis cannot be a dumping ground. It cannot be a dumping ground for whatever pet theory you have. It's got to be solid. It's got to be real, and you got to follow the evidence. And if you're going to make a claim that, hey, say the Ricat, whatever lame structure is Atlantis, you better come swinging with some serious evidence. And nobody does that. So just get rid of this. Get rid of this. Get rid of Antarctica. Get rid of Britain. Britain's has its own issues. All these areas have their own situations with respect to cataclysms. I will get to that stuff in a completely different show. This is just me trying to get you guys to research correctly. Don't forget, apply your critical thinking skills. Ask questions. Very simple question to prove that this has nothing to do with Atlantis. Where are the ruins? There's nothing here. And there has never been anything even remotely close found here or even in the surrounding area that would ever lead you to believe that some sort of super civilization lived down here. All right. Good God. All right. Another thing that pisses me off. What else pisses me off about Atlantis? Yeah. So, okay. This doesn't piss me off, but it's something we have to be careful of. So over here, North America. Now, if I'm following science and I'm following recorded history from our ancient ancestors, I have to admit that some cataclysms went down. So I'm doing that. I'm admitting, hey, some major earth-changing cataclysms happened, which changed the face of the earth. All right, so the shorelines we see now, these were not in existence a few thousand years ago. So there were different shorelines here, and we have tons of evidence for that. I'll do another show on that later that proves all that, but that's not, we don't need to go crazy with that here. If you're listening to me here about what not to do with your Atlantis research, you already know that, or generally should know that. Now, if Atlantis was real, that means that it's possible, maybe, that some part of America was maybe connected, or maybe had something to do with it. Maybe. People there's another group of studies that are just flat out saying that North America, this whole area up here, that this is Atlantis. And no, it's not. Once again, it's not in the Atlantic Ocean. It is not close to the Pillars of Heracles. It's not over here. It's way the hell over here. All right. America can't be it for several reasons. The first reason, we don't have we have no ruins, which you would expect kind of in the eastern area, I would guess, at least, that are even close to anything that is described in Atlantis. Right? America is not the original old world. There is a group of researchers out there that is trying to force the meme of America being the original old world. It couldn't possibly have been. We know that because when the cataclysms hit, there's a good chance that all of America here was completely flooded out, and a lot of this probably rose from the ocean relatively recently. Now, before you stop this video from what I just said, and you go try to bring up your porn browser, hold on, listen, right? Just bear with me. We know that Atlantis can't be here for basic reasons. Where are the ruins? There are no ruins that correlate to what Atlantis is supposed to be. They're not there, right? We have other ruins in North America. No, don't get me wrong. North America, the whole continent, South America as well. This whole thing is insane, but it's not Atlantis. It's not Atlantis. So I would caution researchers from lashing out and saying, "Oh yeah, North America is the original homeland, the ancient land, or whatever the hell it's called." No, there's no reason to believe that. That's people that have been psychologically conditioned by today's media to start believing certain things which we have no evidence for. right? If you have evidence for the stuff you're going to make the claim on, that's fine, and I'd love to see it. But it's not there. It just doesn't exist. So I would caution throwing Atlantis as being North America, because once again, Atlantis should be more over here. If we're taking the evidence literally, it really should be over here. All right, and we're probably looking at the imprint of it right here, right? Anyway, so North America, I gotta say no. North America, no. That's something. It doesn't piss me off, but I'm not impressed. You'd have to come swinging with some serious evidence that I don't think anybody's found. There's evidences for other amazing things going on here in North America. Don't get me wrong, but that's a whole other separate, sort of separate situation. They're all connected. Another thing, some people try to say Greenland. Greenland kind of suffers the same problem as Antarctica. It's not under the water. It's up north. I don't hear too many people saying Greenland is Atlantis. So this doesn't anger me, but don't do it. There's no reason for that. All right, what else? What other things do people think is Atlantis that just, man? No, I think that's it. Those are the main points. If you're an Atlantean researcher, start asking the real questions. Stop believing in your pet theories if your pet theories don't truly have the evidence to back them up. And I cannot stress enough to go and look at the new sciences that have been developed in the past 100 years. Well, these sciences have been going on forever. They're just not publicized as well as relativity and all that crap. Electric universe, plasma physics. Velikovsky is a fantastic place to start for historians. These are the things I highly recommend you branch out into if you're studying Atlantis, because you're nowhere near the truth if you're not looking into these. I mean, why wouldn't you want the new sciences on your back, right? Why wouldn't you want the experiments that took place in Los Alamos that just proved this stuff right? Why wouldn't you use that, right? Nobody uses it. Well, not nobody. The Electric Universe and Velikovsky uses it, etc. That group, fantastic, and they're on the right track as far as I can tell. But if you're somebody that isn't employing the new sciences, and if you are somebody that is stuck back in the past with the old concepts of the old sciences, and you have not moved on, you're way behind, right? So move on. All right, that's enough. I've talked enough crap. For those, yeah, we're done. All right, that's enough. All right, so Atlantis is probably here. It's got to be around here somewhere. We'll go over a more in-depth Atlantis show later that picks apart details and covers some stuff. But mainly, stop doing this crap. Atlantis is not down here. Atlantis is not here. Atlantis is not up here. And it sure as hell isn't over here. All right? There's no evidence for any of that stuff. The Atlantic Ocean, very clearly, the name, Atlantic. All right. Yeah, we're done.